Hey everybody, before we get started, I just want to remind you this episode is brought to you by our patrons like Ahago Comics, Kwa, Jeremy Vasquez, Kylie Denton, Nestor Flores, and Sotosan0424. If you like what we do and want to see us do more, consider supporting us on Patreon. You can get access to episodes early and lots of other goodies, and it would help us out. Thanks for your support, everybody. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. It is time to talk about Legend of the Five Rings, the role-playing game again. Yes, I know, I said I'd do another Enter the Dojo. But hey, the Shadowlands PDF actually came out, so we're going to do that first. It's another review. It's going to be kind of like our Emerald Empire review, but hopefully a little bit shorter, because the book is a little bit more compact and organized into only like 3 sections. So, there's that. And yes, I'm a little disappointed with how I think the PDF was handled. I found out about it and bought it just from people randomly saying that it was available on drive-thru. And I don't want to say FFG completely dropped the ball either, because I think it was like a day or two after I bought it that drive-thru sent me an email notification like, oh, hey, this product's available now. And then, like a day after that, FFG was out with like an official release. So if y'all could get that together a lot tighter, that'd be great. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Shadowlands. And not Mask of the Oni, because I don't have that one. No offense to Can Adventures, I don't usually do that with FFG. Sometimes I do. But not often. Anyway, we're here to talk about Shadowlands. So, if you don't recall from the announcement article and then the video I did on that, Shadowlands is probably going to set the standard for a lot of our books coming forward. You know, I expect that given its description, Courts of Stone will basically be formatted the same, and then whatever comes after that will be that way. Which, we should be getting some more previews of Courts of Stone probably later this month, and then maybe a new announcement. I don't really know how fast-paced they're doing this, but it seems like they're going pretty fast. Anyway. We're basically, much like their Star Wars splat books, we're probably going to get this same 3-chapter format for these areas, and then locational-based books, if there are any more than Emerald Empire, will probably be that similar, like, 6 or 7 chapters. So, we're basically going to kind of like run through the chapters and my thoughts on them, and what you might get out of them, and kind of like how helpful they are to let you know whether or not you think this book is good, what kind of stuff's in it, because I know some people have been wondering if it's a good choice, because I was especially of the opinion, but so were other people, that Emerald Empire is basically an essential buy. It doesn't give you necessarily a lot of specific information, but it gives you a lot of general information to just be like, here's what your day-to-day life is, and here's what an example of what basically anywhere in the Empire is. You throw a rock at the, dart at the map, I should say, or you throw a rock from where you're standing. You hit anywhere, you can probably run it okay off Emerald Empire. And it has loads and loads of plot hooks. Not that this doesn't, but it's formatted a little bit differently. So, it's divided into 3 chapters, which is basically, the first one is all history and fluff, the second one's all player options, the third one's all stuff the GM needs to know. And not to say that players can't get advantages out of the fluff chapter, or even the 3rd chapter, because there's titles in there, but the different kind of effects, I think, are really organized that way. So, let's stop rambling and kind of get into the review. So, the first chapter is Dark Histories. This is all you need to know about the Shadowlands itself, and also a lot about the Crab Clan. It's broken into, in my PDF anyway, 5 little subsections. So there's the Shadowlands. This is both its actual history. There's a Shadowlands map, which is very helpful because the Shadowlands moves around a lot. There's a lot of discussion about what, the actual geography, such as it is, of the Shadowlands is. A lot of what we know about the Shadowlands. A lot of adversaries for the Shadowlands in generic, including not just a handful of Japanese-inspired monsters like Gashidokuro, the giant skeleton, but there's also, I have no idea how to actually pronounce this, but Penangalan? Or possibly Penangalang? There's a double G in there, and I'm not sure how to do with that. That's not the language I'm familiar with, but that's, I believe, is that, that's from, like, the Philippines or some other Pacific islands. I don't remember which one. I think it was the Philippines, but it's the, the horrible thing that goes around. Turns into different stuff. But they also have, like, revenants, flaming wheels, stuff like that. So they go through a lot of different stuff, adversaries, and so on in there. Lots of different locations and adventure seeds. Then there's the Nezumi, so it explains all about the Ratlings and their thing. It kind of talks about their abilities, what they do, how they organize themselves. Gives plenty of sidebars, adventure hooks, that kind of stuff you can use. And then the next 2 sections, I should say, are pretty focused on the crab. So there's the actual section titled The Crab Clan, which gives you outlines and details of all the crab families. It gives you plot hooks. It gives you their lands and kind of that description and what locations are there, stuff like that. Obviously, for the Hiruma, that's kind of truncated, but that's their whole thing. Works through all the families, all their stuff. Lots of useful tips. Next is the wall, which actually describes the history of the wall, how it was kind of assembled, the different aspects of it. There's a lovely map of a example watchtower, which is helpful if you love that sort of thing. Rumors, different things, tactics on the wall, how people handle things, that sort of stuff. Loads and loads of little plot hooks. And then the final section is patrolling the Shadowlands, which is actually like, what do you do on a patrol? Where do you go? How do you come back? What kind of rumors are there? It's pretty short, but it's just the kind of thing to capstone the whole thing off. So, all in all, this is a really good section. Like, the book is probably worth it, especially, since you can get it a little bit cheaper in PDF form. For this section alone, because if you ever wanted to run anything about the Shadowlands, or about the Crab Clan, which is basically like, if you're talking about Crablands, you're basically talking about the Shadowlands. They are so about the Shadowlands and their constant war that it's hard to separate the two, which is why it's really good that they call this book Shadowlands, and especially if you look at like the GM section, which we'll talk about a little bit later, the book is really focused on like addressing that issue, but at the same time, I think integrating a Crab Clan into this is a really good way too. Like, you get to talk about a great clan, you get to talk about their families and stuff, kind of their different aspects, but you also spend a lot of time talking about the Shadowlands. So, if you're going to play a Crab Clan character, this is great. If you're going to play anybody who's ever been on the wall or anything like that, great stuff. Very useful to you, all kinds of history, ideas, whatever. Like, I'm not sure I'd heavily feature the Shadowlands in any of my current campaign ideas. And we'll talk about that sort of thing later when we get to the GM section, Chapter 3. But this basically told me, I think, everything I wanted to know at a high level. And gave me plenty of weird monsters and stuff to throw out there. So, the second chapter, probably be a little bit more complex to talk about. This one's Honor Against Demons. So, this is very much a player-facing segment. Now, the GM gets a lot out of this too, but this is like... Well, first off, immediately, you scroll past the intro, and it's the Falcon Clan. It's their history, kind of what's going on with them, where they live, all their different stuff. And this immediately ends with a new player rules. So it's basically kind of like the Mantis insert, but also it has an adventure seed in there. And, a couple of different NPCs, like, Amazuku, the bureaucracy of the Gakido realm. So that's pretty cool. And then, like I said, it ends in Falcon Clan stats. So it's got the whole workup from Core or Emerald Empire. What do you know? What does Bushido mean to you? The whole minor clan family. And then after that, we dovetail into new schools. And then there's some other stuff at the end. But talking about this in order, new schools actually sets what I think is a very interesting and very hopeful precedent. Because I know that some people were kind of concerned, Emerald Empire came out, most of those were kind of oddball schools, not for every campaign, not every campaign you will be running an Imperial school, or a monk, monks might not be appropriate for every campaign, and especially Kolot or Kitsune infiltrators, not the Kitsune clan, the Kitsune infiltrator, like an actual spirit disguised as a person. Kolot infiltrator and Kitsune impersonator. That's not hard to remember, FFG, not at all. Those are definitely, like, super non-standard options. As much as I'm okay with the Kitsune one, that's also, like, really likely to warp your campaign. So they did introduce a decent amount of schools, but they were kind of, like, very... I think they helped solidify what monk means in this new system, because a lot of people are like, oh, why do Kaito have special invocations, but they can't do no Kiho? They're monks, they should Kiho! Don't know why I use that voice. But I think the two monk schools in Empire really set it up that, no, monk is like, you deal with supernatural stuff, but you don't necessarily have the freedom of a Shugenja to do all Shugenja stuff all the time. Kind of. Like, the Fortunist one does invocations, etc. Anyway, I'm diverging. I'm talking about Emerald Empire. The schools in Shadowlands are really good because there's one for each major clan, and then there is a Falcon Clan school, obviously, because they're introduced in this. So, yeah, this is, I think, a really good way to handle it. Now, some of these might be odd choices a little bit for Shadowlands, but generally I think they're all on theme for the most part, or at least they are. You maybe deal with weird stuff and fighty stuff and could be seen, handling the Shadowlands, right? Like, they're thematically linked, even if they aren't logistically linked. So this is probably another thing we can expect. You're going to get the full array. Every great clan is going to get a new school, and then whatever minor clan obviously will get their school. So the new schools are, there is the Asako Inquisitor School, which is Courtier Shugenja. There is the Kakita Swordsmith School, which is Artisan Courier. Courier? No, that's Mia. There's the Kitsu Medic School, which is Artisan Bushi. That's a little bit of an interesting choice, but I like it. There's the Kuni Warden School, which is a monk school. They, by the way, do the key house, but also a lot of punching people. There's the Miramoto Taoist Blade School, probably one of my favorites because it's just so anime. They're really cool, but we'll save that for a future end of the dojo. There's the Moto Avenger School, which is a Shugenja school. Oh, and I should say that the Taoist Blade is Bushi Monk. And there's the Toritaka Phantom Hunter, which is a Shugenja school, but they do get a Daisho. And then there's the Yogo Preserver School, which is another Shugenja one. And yes, the Yogo did get 2 schools before Bayushi got 2. And before any Scorpions got a Bushi school. But hey, Scorpions are weird. And after that, there's a section of some new advantages and disadvantages. They're not long. They're just a couple that make sense. So, like, there's a new passion for creatures. There's a couple new advantages, like Light Sleeper, Dead Eyes. And then there's some new adversities. You can have a demonic wound. You could have lost your name. You can get some new anxieties. Obtuse is a fun one, but there's also, like, hard-hitting stuff, like Fallen Ancestor or Reformed Mahotsukai. There's some new versions of the Taint disadvantages, which kind of give you some interesting effects. Like, some of them have positive and negative effects. Like, for instance, distorted limbs means you're able to reach things in narrow gaps and climb faster than usual because you got weird stuff going on. The unnatural skin means your skin counts as concealed armor. There's even one that's you can conceal non-physical effects of your taint, or you can eat really gross tainted stuff and remove all strife. So, like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, the Shadowlands is really lowball. Now, I'll say this. I think the game's deliberately kind of phrased like that, because, for instance, FFG's Star Wars game is, I think, the first game where you can, out of the book, play a character who's dark side aligned. Like, before even they got into the Force-focused game line, it was just like, it causes you some strain, because that's not natural to you. But then you actually get into the morality. It's like, the morality system, like, no, you can follow the dark side, and you're still a perfectly functional player character. You make things worse for other players, but you're still pretty good. You're perfectly fine. And playable. So I think that, like, especially as a newer game, FFG is a little bit like no, there shouldn't be a, like, save or die, fuck you, you're tainted all the way, you gotta take your character sheet. Like, the fact that they retain no, if you get tainted all 5 rings, you're donezo. Right? Like, that I think is not necessarily how a lot of games are run, but the game itself is not, I think, majority a horror game, and once again, we'll talk about more of those themes when we talk about Chapter 3, because that's got a lot of advice about that sort of stuff. And there are some ideas in this book, especially in the first chapter, to kind of, like, make the Shadowlands stuff harder. It's like, now, if you're in, like, the depths of the Shadowlands, you can increase how fast Jade burns out, you can increase how rapidly you need to make afflicted checks. Certain conditions can make the TN for those checks harder. But all in all, I think it's not meant to be quite as much of a death spiral, because I don't think FFG wants to necessarily force anybody's character to go a certain way, even if that's the theme, right? Like, only if your GM and you, the players, are agreed that, like, no, we're going in on this, that, like, okay, then definitely there needs to be a significant risk that you slide down. But it can't happen accidentally, because that, I think that, I'm pretty sure I'd have to double check it, but this is similar to the advice they have about the Kolat school or the Kitsune impersonator school. It's like, or even some of the other Imperial ones, which is like, hey, talk to your players or talk to your GM before you pick all these schools and stuff or let this stuff go, because they can really warp a campaign. I think a lot of the more insidious parts of the Shadowlands are the same. It's like, yeah, you really shouldn't fuck up everybody's entire storylines and day just because, oh, well, you whiffed on that check to de-afflict yourself. But the fact that these Shadowlands taint disadvantages actually have positive effects, I think, leans slightly higher into the, oh, well, you might get a benefit out of it. You might have that reason to actually let yourself get tainted or to take these at character creation or something. You'll get something out of it, even though it's technically a disadvantage. There's also a new block of heritage roles. They are not specifically for Crab, interestingly enough. They often mean that you probably have some kind of ancestral connection to the Crab, but they can also be good for just anybody who's got connections to the Shadowlands. Like, one of your ancestors vanished. Hey, guess what? Sometimes dumb people from all kinds of clans go into Shadowlands. Like, there's that whole Dark Moto problem. The Phoenix have probably done some dumb stuff over the years. Stuff like that. People think they can solve these problems, and they really can't. But there's a lot of interesting little choices and stuff here that you can use that works for all kinds of options if you're going to try to have that more tainty stuff in your campaign, more spookums. There are whole sections for new items, so there's a new weapons section that's got a lot of interesting options. A lot of these are obviously suited for Crab, but they got some fun stuff. There's some shields. They also have some siege weapons, which are good for any campaign, really, because there should be a small, even if you're doing like a military thing, there should be a small amount of sieges, but the Crab are most famous for that. There's a couple things of new armor. They're not necessarily super impressive, but like they have a place most of the time. I think everybody agrees that the Tatami Gusaku, the folding armor, is a little weird because it's like we're not sure what they mean by war. Like, it says war gear when equipped, but it's like, why war gear only applies when equipped? Other than narratively, it's like also anybody who sees war gear can recognize it. So I guess when it's folded up, you can carry it. But yeah, I don't know. It's not super expensive or rare, at least, so it's not a huge deal. But there are some fun armors. There's new personal effects, most of which don't have anything super mechanical to worry about. That there are like smoke arrows and a spyglass. There's also the Tate, like basically portable cover. But a lot of these are just, hey, more stuff you can put on your character sheet to give yourself more narrative uses, like, a smithy kit or an engineer's kit. There's a new mechanic called Signature Scrolls. It's unfortunately not very elaborated on. I expect they're going to have more selections later. But for the moment, it offers you these 3 options for like Signature Scrolls, which so if you're a Shugenjin, you meet the requirements, you can spend EXP to learn the quote-unquote secret of a Signature Scroll. And basically learn like a secret technique which alters your stuff. Like, for instance, the first example given is called Ichi Second Sight. If you're a Crab Clan member and a Witch Hunter, which is a title we'll talk about a little bit later, you can spend 3 XP to gain use of the scroll, and then after that, whenever you successfully use an invocation to scry, any supernatural or tainted beings you perceive as part of the invocation glow faintly and are visible to you, even through smoke, mist, fog, or obscured vision. So anything that has that scry keyword, you can be like, taint! Sense it right away. Fun stuff like that. It's just 2 of them require you to be Crab, and then also have like higher requirements. Like, that one requires you to have a special title. The other one that's Crab focused requires you to be school rank 3. So only one of them has like a special big recruiters are just your Shugenja. So I'm thinking probably when we get to like Phoenix, we'll get a lot more of those, and maybe we'll see a couple in every book from now on to cover a few signature scroll ideas for every clan's Shugenja. Next up is item patterns. This is basically weapon and armor mods from other FFG type games. There's a couple available. There's the Kakita pattern, the Kenzo blade, the Shurigana Jade inlay, Uchema's technique for armor, and Yasunori steel. And they're mostly mild, but they're pretty effective. They cost XP to learn, unless you're a Kakita swordsmith, and then you start with the Kakita pattern. Duh. When you're building a weapon, you can add the effect. It has a rarity modifier, so if you're trying to like acquire or buy one, it accounts for all that. And it's, I think, a really useful thematic way to kind of stick in some of those stuff. They're a little crane or crab focused right now, because obviously the Kakita swordsmith is in here. Though there is an evil pattern, it's actually way up there in the first chapter, but it makes sense to talk about now. You can get pit-forged obsidian weapons, which are, like, extra evil. And then there are some interesting item parts, so they've got what they call Artifacts of Jigoku is the section, and that's, like, all kinds of evil Shadowlands items. Talking about using them, carrying about stuff. They note that if you're carrying a cursed item, your composure is reduced by 2, and you unmask in a specific new way. And they have lots of, like, creepy items you can pick. But then they also have Blessed Treasures. So they talk about, you know, various ways to use Jade and Obsidian. Then they talk about specific crab special items. So there's the Oni Cutting Sword of Hiruma, which is lost, so you can find it somewhere. They talk about how Jade Petal Tea works, which is cool. There's also the Obsidian Ink, some cups and stuff. You know, it's small, but a little bit. That's another thing that we should probably expect, that there's going to be a couple of these pages of, like, big name artifacts or items. Not a big deal, but enough to give you some plot hooks or give you some ideas. It has a section for new techniques where it talks about there's a new invocation, a couple new rituals you can get, which are pretty neat. And then there's the section on Maho, which basically rounds this out, and it's, like, all kinds of stuff you can do. Sacrifices, forbidden text, talking about blood price, talking about summoning demons, and then there's a whole bunch of new Maho techniques, several of which are higher ranked. You can actually get a couple of which are, like, you know, rank 3 or rank 4. So this really spices up Maho, whether it's enemies using it, or if you're a player character who wants to delve into that subject. And that's basically your chapter 2. Like I said, mostly player-facing options, but your GM can use them too. And so the third section, which I've referenced a couple times, is pretty important. This is the probably mostly GM section out of the Shadows. So it starts off right away with a section called Running Shadowlands Games. And then it talks about using horror themes in Rokugan. So you can draw against different themes for this sort of stuff. And then it talks about, you know, caution with, like, okay, you know, you gotta be careful about what your level of horror and your level of intensity is, because that's gonna, like, throw a lot of stuff into sharp relief, and so you have to be careful when you do it. It talks about picking your intensity, so you can talk about low intensity, mid intensity, high intensity kind of stuff, which is like, okay, so, you know, decide how much of your action is Shadowlands. Is it just a little bit? Is it, like, half and half? Is it, like, entirely? You can mix and escalate. There's a great sidebar example on this margin note, which is like, so, for example, you start a low-intensity game. You encounter a single Mahotsukai, which leads you to uncover a large cult as a mid-intensity, but then the leader escapes to the Shadowlands, so if you want to wrap this storyline up, you gotta pursue him. That becomes a high-intensity. They talk about different horror elements, paranoia, creeping dread, visceral horror, and kind of like how to bring it all together, right? So there's a couple of pages which are purely advice on, like, okay, here's how, for L5R, you want to approach these themes, how you should figure out how to mix and match them kind of stuff, what levels you want to put it at, which is what I was talking about, like, you know, the aspect that you don't necessarily want the rules to make sure every encounter with Shadowlands stuff is high intensity all the time, right? You as the GM and players should pick that and kind of, like, figure out how that works. They talk about player characters in Maho, you know, some character notes, writing specifically on the wall, dealing with other different aspects and stuff, and lots of just helpful Shadowlands queries, like, oh, okay, that's relevant to this, and that's relevant to that. Then there's a bunch of new titles, which deal with various things. You've got the Damned, you've got a Harvester, 20 Goblin Crab, Witch Hunter, etc. They've got a new charts for spending opportunity, so, like, some examples. By the way, if you're not familiar with FFG's games of this type, like Star Wars RPG or Genesis, expect this shit a lot. So this has charts for spending opportunity in new ways. So there's spending opportunity in Shadowlands against tainted creatures while tainted. So different opportunities that can be like suggestions. There's only like one for each element, but there are little suggestions to be like on theme. There is a whole section on corruption, which is also another important thing to do. Talking about the different thing, how corruption works, different aspects, how to roleplay characters while tainted better. You know, fairly decent advice. That's why I say that this section's not just for GMs. Players can learn from it too. And then there's the big section on Oni generation. This gives you a couple different ranks of Oni, basically templates, which you can start with, which have all kinds of crazy conflict ranks. And then it's like, oh, and now Shadowlands powers. So these will improve your Oni's various, military or social ranks, and then actually show off a lot of different powers they can get, which have different abilities. And yes, you could tap all kinds of stuff on there, or you can just go with a few. And then it talks a lot about how to build their motivations as an NPC and, give some examples. And then there's a section on the tenets of Bushido, courage, so guess what? This section's also probably going to be out there a lot. If there's probably going to be 7 books of this. So it gives some new examples of... Sorry, I yawned. It gives some new examples of gaining and losing honor based on courage. Talks a little bit about how the actual virtue of courage is defined and how you interact with that. Helpful stuff. And then it's got, at the very end, it's got a new demeanor and some new NPC templates you can use, including a new way of unmasking angry dismay. And that's it's basically the book there. Like I said, shorter than talking about Emerald Empire. So my overall thoughts, after breaking down all the 3 chapters, love this book. I don't think it's as essential as Emerald Empire, as I really love that one. That was a great read all the way through. This is pretty helpful and informative, but because all the fluff stuff is focused in one chapter, it's not a captivating read for as long. Once you get out of the first chapter and, you get past that initial hump where they talk about the Falcon, it's mostly just mechanics and descriptions, and it's a lot of that stuff's interesting. It's not, like I said, captivating. That said, on the one hand, yes, this book is exactly what its tagline says, the essential guide to the Dominion of Fulang. If you are planning on doing anything Shadowlands in this new system and you're not just going to, roll off the cuff, this is for you. It gives you both hard and fast locations you can use and also suggestions for locations and plot hooks you can use. It gives you lots of NPC types, lots of different adversaries of a wide variety that you can use in addition to the stuff in the start. It gives you lots of advice as a GM if you're not sure how to handle some of these themes. Or, if you're a player and you're thinking about how you want to interact with this stuff, that can be helpful too, to actually read the sections and talk with your GM about what you think the level of intensity and what sort of approaches you want to do with a game focused on the Shadowlands. So that's pretty critical, I think. If you're interested in playing a crab, also pretty important, gives lots of details about their backstories, their various families, their internal politics, a lot of the layout of their land and stuff, a lot of themes that your character as being part of one of the various crab families might feel. If you're doing anything on the wall, of course, stuff like that. That's it's perfect for. The other stuff, that's pretty good too. If you're just a casual L5R GM or player and you're maybe the schools are cool, maybe the new gear is cool. All that stuff is great. I don't think anything necessarily blows it out of the water. There's been some hullabaloo about Shikigami, about how they're really good. I don't know, I haven't played with them. I think that they're intended to probably have positive results because you've got to invest a lot of time in making them work. I believe it's a downtime activity and it requires various fluff components to build one. And you have to have the invocation once you are giving it, and you have to, it only gets 1 action per turn. So it's you're making a lot of sacrifices, so if you're actually using them, they should be effective. Kind of thing. Otherwise, why the fuck would you bother? But like I said, I haven't actually played with them myself, so I'm not sure about the specifics in play. We like to do a lot of theory craft, but that's still, kind of complex. Even if you're not necessarily going Shadowlands, if you want to do anything with Maho as a GM or a player, obviously this has I think a dozen more at various ranks, like I said. So there's that, and there's advice about how to handle that as a GM and stuff. So that's probably pretty useful. But otherwise, a lot of the new gear is illustrative but not required. I think it's better if you're a crab because that gives you some more flexibility and options to be I'll make sure to carry the carpenter's hammer type thing, or I'm a crab, I want the Oyuroi, I want the big crabby armor. Crab noises. Stuff like that. The schools are really neat. I like them a lot. But they're not required, but obviously they add a little bit of extra stuff. So, Kitsu Medic is pretty interesting. They're actually really good at healing. Like I said, the Taoist Blade is, really oddball and interesting, and I'm surprised they're in this book, but they work really well for it, and they're really cool. Some of them are pretty basic, like, obviously, Asako Inquisitor is like, oh yeah, of course it's here. The Kakita Swordsmith is really useful for the new pattern system, and, interesting stuff that kind of comes to the game. And obviously, there's, handfuls of Shugenja schools, which are pretty neat to add to this. Some of them are thematic. The Moto School, for instance, is the only one that I think has a limit on their elements right now. You can only take Earth or Air invocations. So that's pretty cool that, they're introducing that as a possible element. So I'm sure that some of the Phoenix stuff will probably take advantage of that in the future. We'll see. If you wanted to say, play a Kuni who's not a Shugenja, there's the Kuni Warden School now who are good at beating up people and silencing them, but not necessarily magic. Got a lot of good options. I don't think those are necessarily sellers, on its own, if you're just like, oh, I want new schools. Not everybody in your group needs to buy a copy. But I think, for GMs, this is a pretty essential buy if you're going to deal with these themes. So I won't ramble on too much more. There's my, rough outline, review, sections, overall thoughts. It's really good. Super excited to see Courts of Stone now. Like I said, I feel like Shadowlands is probably setting the tone for and the structure for all these books going forward. It's incredibly similar to how they release all their Splat books for Star Wars, or how they released them since they're all out now. And I guess I wonder how they're going to format the Clone Wars book. I know people got early copies of that at a Celebration, but it's not officially out, so I haven't double checked how's it organized. But we're looking forward to Courts of Stone. And, like I said, hopefully more of those previews will come out this month, because obviously Shadowlands is out now, and it's been a while since Courts of Stone was announced. And maybe we'll get an announcement on a new one. I don't know. I'd have to check the publishing schedule about when exactly what is supposed to come out. But, when Courts of Stone comes out, we'll wait a month until they get a PDF, as usual, and then I'll do a review. Alright, so with that all said, like I said, won't keep it any longer. I'll just say to remind you that if you like this video, give it a like. Helps the analytics, helps let us know that people are, responding to these videos. If you have any comments, leave them in the comment section down below. Other than if they're to critique my pronunciation. Because I talked a lot for half an hour, so, sometimes... Listen, I think I've said this before, I don't always speak English perfectly. You can also join our Discord, that link's in the description. And, of course, if you're new here and have not already, please subscribe, because, yes, we do occasionally do L5R videos. I did a lot more stream of consciousness review of the Unicorn novella, which came out. So, not obviously anywhere near as structured by this, because it was a book in novel format. So, it would be kind of weird if I went chapter by chapter by it. But it was immediately after I read it, so it was very fresh in my mind. And even if you're subscribed, don't forget that bell for notifications. So you always know when we post a new video. Sometimes that can be a little chaotic. And like it says at the front of the show, consider supporting us get Patreon and get access to episodes early. It's very helpful to us. Helps fund stuff for us to do. And yeah. Alright, I'll see you in the next video. Keep an eye out. I swear. I'm gonna do that end of the dojo someday. Someday I'll have free time. Probably not this week. I got a dentist cleaning to go to tomorrow. Anyway. See you guys. And I don't know, what's most appropriate for this? I guess, always live 3 feet from death. Not any closer. Don't go any closer, guys. Alright, I'll see you.